We're going to give people a couple minutes just to, or I should say like 30 more seconds to log in here. But thanks everyone for joining us today. Raul, so glad that you're here as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Obviously, everything regarding Division D and the trade desk, but also getting to talk a little about CTV trends, everything that's currently going on in the marketplace, and having some really great conversation.
Yeah. So here we go. Welcome to a connected conversation that is CTV trends and tactics and truths. And as many of you just heard, or for those of you just joining us, our partner Raul Montoya on the trade desk is joining us today. I'm Nicole Kubler, our Vice President of Sales Strategy here at Division D. We're really excited to dig in on this topic with all of you attending. One of the biggest pieces of news circulating the trades and conference circuit right now is that CTV is going to account for nearly 60% of all advertising investment across TV and digital video. And that's more than just a stat at this point. That is a huge signal in how audiences and consumption are shifting and how advertisers need to start approaching this marketplace. And it's not just the big brands that are in this space anymore. CTV is a channel that isn't optional, but it has become table stakes. And it's an environment that is working for advertisers of all sizes, including independent agencies, independent brands, and small businesses alike. So whether you're activating in CTV or just starting your exploration with us today, this session was built to meet you where you are with insights from both the buy side and the sell side. But first, we know audiences are shifting fast. And so we're going to take a moment to check in with you. What are you watching these days? Raul, what
I
has
just
captured you?
I have been I just completely ran through The Pit, which is on HBO Max. It's kind of like an extension of ER, but it's incredible. And I finished it within about 48 hours. I was just hooked. So between working and watching that, I was stuck.
Yeah, I'm such a sucker for The White Lotus, and I know that that just wrapped. Looks like several of our audience members, about a quarter of you, are joining me in The White Lotus here. I heard, I don't know if this is true, that the fourth season is going to be filmed in Northern Europe. So I will be very excited for a winter ski version of that. We'll see what Mike White comes up with. So thank you all of you for participating in that. And I always like that kind of question just because it reveals a few different things. What I personally need to add to queue, what Raul needs to add to queue to watch, but it also gives a peek and sample of the fragmentation that exists, in this space. The mix of all of these different live sports that are airing on different platforms, new fast channels that are entering the space, all this great content that are on several different platforms. We're all streaming something different across different platforms, apps, and devices. But this creates a really powerful combination and canvas for marketers to use CTV as both awareness and a performance in one unified channel.
Yeah, and I thought you brought up a really great point when we talk about like behavior, and every single day there's more and more cord cutters. So the ability to scale out CTV gets bigger and bigger every day. And like we're bringing up different types of episodes or contents that exist. Audiences are number one, and then we go back to the environment being number two. But if you're not necessarily leveraging out publishers such as like an HBO Max or Netflix, you're missing out on a ton of those. So I'm glad that we're able to talk about specific shows because they're on specific publishers that you can obviously get access to and some that you've probably never leveraged before.
Yeah, I mean, people consume differently too, right? Like some are sitting down regularly every same time every evening. Some are doing the Sunday bed rot version. Those responses are all over the map and across all of those different providers. And that behavioral shift in how, where, and when we watch is exactly what is reflecting that growth that I just referenced earlier. Because streaming isn't just a generational habit at this point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think especially consumers are getting smarter about the kind of content that they want to consume. So they look at providers, if it's talking about a VMVPD, where can I access the content or the shows or the live sports that I want to use? So it's not necessarily just cord cutting, but also downsizing and consolidating. Like, how do you want to have access to what you're looking for? And that could be through like a Hulu, through several of our partners that we currently access, but that's constantly happening every day.
Yeah, and it's one of those myths that we run into a lot because there really is two, right? And that CTV has historically been either inaccessible based on budget or inaccessible just because of that fragmentation that's existed, right? And both of those are really highly solvable at this point. That shift in the fragmentation is sort of continuing to happen, and it's not a seismic shift, it's an evolution that was almost expected as people were moving out of linear and those dollars are shifting from linear into that streaming platforms from the consumer behavior. You know, advertisers now have access to all of these different environments that are referred to as lean back, but depending on the show and how excited I personally am, sometimes it's a lean forward too. But it's a high impact environment that gives all the sights and sounds, emotions of television in all these different spaces.
Couldn't agree more. And not to immediately just plug in like our relationship and partnership that we've had with Division D for over the last 7 years. I think what makes our partnership so strong is the fact that Division D and the Trade Desk are parallel in how they're kind of structured between the sales staff, the accounting staff, the implementation team. But I kind of view the Division D almost as just another extension of the Trade Desk. And when we talk about like CTV and having the access and having those barriers to entry, and we talk about like first access. So whether it's a Netflix audience that just came to a partnership with us last year, whether it's like live sports, we can have these conversations to make sure that all of your advertisers or everyone in this room can be part of or basically have access to. Most recently, we obviously had our launch of Kokai in the last 2 years, but we look at what do CPMs look like over the course of the last first 2 months when you've had a campaign go live, and we're seeing CPMs go low as far as 20%. So how can we get as efficient as possible with your buys while making your budgets last longer and stretch further? So if you've ever had an issue with getting into live sports, like have that conversation with us.
Yeah, it's so exciting because, Raul, even with all these different outlets, it's reiterating that there's a seat at the table for everyone in this space, right?
No, I couldn't agree more about having your, position at the seat or having your seat at the table rather, especially when we're talking with like medium-sized businesses. Like it's still important to appear in front of like an HBO Max or Netflix. And some folks might feel like, well, I don't know if I can justify a $50 to $7 CPM. Or, with the World Cup that's about to begin in about 4 days, some folks might see CPM somewhere between $80 to $200. Does that fit within my budget? Ultimately, it can just understands how much are you willing to put in, how much are you looking to buy, and we can advocate and advise. Well, this is the type of cap in which we can make sure that we can get wins on bids. We can make sure that you follow up or you appear in the geo that you're specifically looking to align with. So I think a lot of this is just having these open conversations of like, what is it that you need?
Yeah, and honestly, you bring up an interesting point on some of those CPMs, right? Because if you think about it in the context of costs for linear or even linear in live television, those are instrumentally a lot higher. And what's really interesting in CTV though is a lot of that growth and a lot of that accessibility has been driven by the biddable CTV prices even going down, right? And that level of flexibility and that pricing has leveled the playing field for many of those independent brands and agencies. So the reality is even 5 years ago, there was little biddable CTV activity, especially when you're looking at the likes of some of these premium partners, the HBOs, the Disneys, everyone else. You had to be a top 200 advertiser to get in there. You had to have a one-to-one relationships with those networks and programmers to strike that deal. But now that's even more accessible. There's another side of the coin to that though, which is there's a way to over partnerize. Too many fragmented systems, too many dashboards. Suddenly, things aren't as efficient, and that's where a partnership like the one that Division D has with the Trade Desk offloads a lot of that responsibility, where you aren't spending time toggling between 6, 7, 10 different dashboards just to pull a few levers.
100%. I couldn't agree more. The only other thing I'd add on, like we always want to speak to the audience first and let the environment appear second. Especially with our new partnerships that have come about in the last year or so. I mean, there's audiences that folks have never been able to tap into, such as like a Netflix. So those I would still advise as creating like PMPs and having setups to, you're going to be the first to market with leveraging folks in whatever DMA that you're looking to go after. But these are going to be new consumers that have never seen an ad across a Netflix. So those are still viable options as well, on top of placing on audiences with environments.
Yeah, and that complexity in this space is only going to grow if we've watched how things have shifted. And with different mergers and acquisitions, you've got to have the right team and the right tech in place. And so we're here to help simplify, streamline, and activate with confidence across all of those different channels, looking at how audiences are engaging, looking at how audiences have shifted and will continue to shift. There was a seismic-ish shift during the pandemic that really catapulted CTV into the forefront and helped move that along further. And we're continuing to see different entrants for data, measurement, and all of the powerful tools that come with digital that then get coupled with the big screen of TV into what is CTV.
And one thing I want to add on top of that, I think we can fall into a pitfall of, CTV is considered upper funnel only. I think about all the proprietary solutions that we've created here at the Trade Desk that Division D happens to leverage a ton across all their advertisers. But CTV should be throughout the entire funnel. It's essentially a call to action. And then you have multiple channels that can then help out with that conversion to take place that action. Ultimately, there's ways in which you can leverage out and test out where does CTV fit. But if a person takes somewhere between 6 to 7 touch points to convert, CTV shouldn't necessarily just be the first two. It's kind of when we're talking about attribution. And if the last touch point is a display click-through ad, and how things used to happen in the past where, well, let's put all the attribution towards that last piece. That's not the case anymore, especially when we talk about like our path to conversion solution, in which we can show you between those 7 or 6 touch points it took, we can show you each specific channel that it took to that person throughout the user journey and show you, okay, CTV took place in the first two, but then it also helped to get that person convert on number 6 before they converted on number 7. There's so much that can be done with CTV, and I wouldn't consider it an upper funnel, but rather consider it as like a complement to continue keeping that pushing down the funnel.
Yeah, I mean, that conversion methodology is so powerful, right? Because it no longer has that blunt box of information where you're not relying on more or less a survey of data, because as we know, like a lot of memories can't always be 100% accurate. And so it really helps to inform both the supply side, the sellers, and the advertiser on how to implement those buys and act on the best interest of those marketers, to place those in places where those audiences are converting, and also to find new audiences, right?
No, completely aligned on that. I mean, leveraging CTV allows you to find folks that essentially you haven't gone after before, especially when we're using, solutions such as like an audience extension, leveraging folks against what they've seen across linear versus what they're doing on CTV now. So it's all about trying to make your dollars work as smart as they possibly can. And so there's several solutions that at Division D they can leverage out, but a lot of these advertisers that's currently even on this call, there's a lot that we can do to make your dollars stretch.
Yeah, and before we get into addressing more of those challenges, we'd love to check in with our audience and hear some of those challenges that you're facing, or your biggest challenges. I wouldn't be lying if I didn't say we curated this poll from some of the most common challenges we hear across independent brands and agencies. But if you don't see your specific challenge listed and you happen to click other, just a little reminder that we'd love for you to pop a question or a comment into the Q&A, so that we can see that and maybe hopefully have some time at the end here. I think we've logged about 10 minutes to answer Q&A questions as they come in. Let's see. Well, right on the money there on measuring and performance, and also high CPMs and budget limitations. So Raul, do any of these specifically stick out to you other than what we talked about already?
Those top two specifically with high CPMs and limited limitations of budgets. I also think that's a little bit of a myth, only because when we're talking about high CPMs, that's kind of how we just always viewed as CTV. And that's kind of how it always was in the past, where if you wanted to get into a Netflix again, it would cost you $75. But that's not necessarily the case anymore, especially when we're talking about leveraging like the SP 500. Like we've seen so many case studies in which, even as recent as a small mid-tier grocer that used to buy at $45 CPMs and now they're seeing somewhere between 35. So ultimately, if you can use a ton of solutions between Division D and Trade Desk, and even testing things out with us, you'll see that your dollars are going to work way further than they've ever done before. But the piece that I want to get into a little bit further would be the measuring aspect, especially when we're talking about CTV. Now, this is something that gets me super excited, and it's called our omni-channel strategy. And this goes back to, and I compare about kind of like making a cake. I also just got into baking in the last like 6 months. I'm not an incredible baker, but this is the, I guess, comparison I'd give. And it comes down to there's several different ways in which you can bake a cake. Whether you take the flour, you put the sugar, or you put Reese's Pieces, or Chips Ahoy dots on them. Either way, there's several different ways in which you can make a cake. When I think about our omni-channel strategy and measurement, what we want to do is show you what are the channels that are ultimately going to help you get your conversion much quicker than ever before. We also want to understand, well, what isn't exactly working for your particular advertiser and your consumers. So think of the omni-channel strategy as leveraging out multiple campaigns that start out with like CTV, audio, and display. And then there could be a second campaign that could be CTV, video, and display. Now, if you add that across 4 other campaigns, we're able to then see, well, which two are actually the most efficient. So then we're actually able to tell you, well, these are the channels that are actually going to work to get you much better CPA, to make your money look a little bit smarter, but also stretch, especially when we talk about limited budgets. I'm sure there's a ton of folks who are trying to figure out, like, especially with everything that's currently going on in the marketplace, I need my dollars to work smarter than ever before. There's several different ways in which Division D and the trade desk can help today.
Exactly. At this point, uh, it's not enough to just put money out there. And most independent brands and agencies aren't looking for scale just for scale's sake, right? And there is a level of ability that both marketers and the buy and sell side need to have to be agile and embrace that industry change and be ready to act on behalf of what's in the best interest for clients. And a lot of times that is iterating across several different channels and being flexible enough to pivot if needed, but also unafraid to act in channels that you haven't really been in before. Often in the case of CTV, if you felt like there was a barrier to entry from a budget aspect, um, it isn't just a branding vehicle. And the budgets and the ability to get in there and actually have those dollars perform are better than ever.
Adding on top of that, there's got to be some risk involved in taking chances. You have to be able to A/B test. I like to think of this as almost like Batman and Robin. And if Batman is CTV, there's multiple channels that can help you get to where you're trying to be. And you always need a Robin to help you be successful.
We see it as a multiplier as CTV is concerned. Of course, those impressions need to carry weight, but you're thinking, how do I get this person to buy now? How do I create this level of urgency with somebody who's watching, the White Lotus and then also, on their phone shopping or consuming, how do I package that CTA together? And that goes beyond just budget. A lot of times that's in creative as well.
Yeah, specifically when we're talking creative, I mean, there's several different ways in which we can help out, especially if there are limitations within any of your advertisers or anybody on this current call. There's a thorough amount of partnerships that we have at the trade desk with Division D, such as like a Spaceback or even like a Bunny Studios. But there shouldn't be any limitations. What I will want to add on top of this is that we should be A/B testing a ton across all of CTV, just because you're going to see different metrics across the board of what works best. Is it 15 versus 30? Is it more so the call to action versus your QR code? There's just so many things that we can do. I think it's the first step is really just having that discussion with your Division D rep, talking about like, this is what I need. This is what I need to get done. How do we get there?
A lot of times too, what you need and what you want to get done, it really does matter on what that message looks like. And historically, think still now, TV commercials are expensive, right? Or at least creating them. And sometimes you only have one asset, or you don't even have an asset. A lot of times, independent brands and agencies are operating in search and social at this point only, but really looking to get into that bigger screen on the home and integrate further with their audience. And that's where Raul, you mentioned a few companies, and even Division D. We have a design studio in house that can help augment that creative or build something out for you, because that really rich visual conversation matters and that connection to audience. I don't know about you, but I certainly remember commercials that resonate with me, and we all hear about it during the Super Bowl as well, for those that did not.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to think of like the Super Bowl commercial that usually gets me is usually the Budweiser Clydesdales. Those usually stick with me. But yeah, going back with what is your commercial?
My commercial is
Yeah.
usually the one that I remember the most, and this is nostalgic for me, is Reese's Pieces
Okay.
with ET. So I just aged myself for everybody that's watching right now. But you don't have to be Budweiser or Reese's Pieces, because we've seen really impactful commercials that resonate with audiences as well in really different ways. And so if creative is something that's precluding you from entry, there's solutions across the board inside Division D and in partnership with Trade Desk. And one of those two is really building that out. So right now, creative, you have it in two forms historically. It was either static in display or just a traditional looking television commercial. But Raul, I'm sure you've seen it, and we've seen it in partnership with some of our campaigns where shoppable, interactive, and dynamic CTV is coming to the forefront. And it is a recommendation that we are making to a lot of our clients depending on their KPIs, especially when we're looking at it from a performance marketing aspect.
Yeah, there's several different ways in which we can kind of go about this whole creative scenario when we're talking about the topics. But there's several publishers that allow for interactiveness, like Hulu is top of mind. That's number one. So whether you're a CPG or you're a tax person, there's several different options in which you can A/B test creatives. Some that call to action, that click through and get more information. Or there's other avenues in which we can talk about specifically with creators about CTV, like QR codes. I mean, getting folks to take your phone, move forward, and then make an appointment. So there's I've definitely have seen from a metric standpoint more engagement across that board. It just comes down to creating that and looking to like what is your actual call to action here.
Yeah, the call to action is so necessary. And even the QR code, there's been a few times where the QR code has come up on screen for a particular brand and it goes away almost immediately. And I'm a little bit slow. I didn't have a chance to pull it out from my pocket or reach across the couch and scan that. And I know our design studio and our creative team would make certain recommendations to prolong that QR code's time on screen. Or even, there's opportunities for somebody to take their remote and engage with product carousels that are, on the screen. If you've got products to feature, there's a whole convergence that's really happening in that experience for audiences and consumers across commerce and what we're considering commerce media and retail media, and how that's being coupled with CTV and the overlap there that presents so many additional opportunities to engage audiences for those smaller brands and independent agencies.
And to add on top of that, and not necessarily voting completely, love the trade desk. I would say, no bias, I would say the trade desk has the greatest retail network available. When we think about Will's fully baked in, we talk about like the Roundells, the Costco's, but even you think about like Walmart, who built their DSP on top of our tech. So when we apply the data along with creative intricacies that you want to do across your CPGs or any other advertiser that you may have, it's going to build well. So those are the type of campaigns that get me excited, especially to talk through, but also build out.
Yeah, and Raul, you kind of took us already through some of that measurement piece at the beginning, right? But with all these rich data sets that then get applied when we're talking about that conversion of commerce and CTV, it's been built off of the historical digital plumbing, for lack of better words, right? So it allows for those more richer and more accountable opportunities that then allow for also richer and more meaningful measurements that's happening, because it doesn't matter if somebody's watching on their television or if that conversion's happening on a phone or a laptop or any other screen on the phone. There's a way for us to start, building and mapping that out to give those independent brands and agencies even more opportunity to see what's working, diversify in that media set, diversify a bit even in that audience aspect, or diversify in the contextual and really continue to build out into their audiences and sales.
I couldn't agree more. And especially when we're talking about like retail networks and doing A/B testing across those, like I'm drinking hint water. And just to disclose super quickly, we talk about endemic versus like a non-endemic brand. An endemic brand is something that is sold in that store. So you can leverage out that data for SKU lists to see how much did I actually sell of hint water at a Joel Osco. I say Joel Osco as a loyal Chicago individual that will always shop at Joel Osco or an Albertsons. And then a non-endemic is something that isn't necessarily sold in that store. But an example would be, let's just say a catering company. And it is, you can't buy a catering company in a Joel Osco. But what you can do is use data sets such as like a Costco, in which buying in bulk. And then you can apply that data set to assume that people who are probably buying in big bulk because they're a catering company or for an office, they're leveraging out pieces from Costco. So all that to say is that if you're an endemic brand, there's several different ways that you want to target, maybe across a Roundel, run a campaign against Roundel and see how many items you're actually selling in a Roundel in Chicago, Illinois versus a Jewel in Chicago, Illinois. And if whether you're a local brand or a national brand, there's a ton that we can test out. And through SKU lists, we can say, well, how much product did you actually move? So there's a way more than ever to really show you this is the type of brand that you sold, this is the type of flavor that you sold more of. So when you can get that granular, there's a massive big story to tell.
Well, and just it's a massive story that builds, I like to call them these micro communities for brands, because that's what really matters when you have that creative piece that is, storytelling on behalf, and then you're able to connect with your community inside of their community across different channels and really drive that home. That's where people still start to build that loyalty, that brand resonance, and a lot of folks really want to support the independent brands, independent agencies. They're eager to see what else, new products, what else is out there, and these different assets to create that local piece can really help develop that.
For sure. When I think about like data sets, obviously like first party is so important because a brand's heart is first party. These are the folks that they've bought, that they've signed up and said, I drink you, I eat you because I love you, and I will always eat and drink you. The second piece just that comes down to retail. It's the folks that are not necessarily buying it direct, but buying it from a store and saying, I will still buy you. I'm just going to buy you at the Jewel down the street. And these are super important data sets to take advantage of. And these are pools, like you mentioned, that are super important that have never been leveraged before.
Yeah, and honestly, it rounds out that conversation a bit about awareness versus performance channel and what CTV can be, right? Because performance marketers, and everyone's a performance marketer these days, it's about how much revenue, website visits, mobile engagements, store visits, and just general campaign metrics have been achieved. Because a lot of times when you are independent, brand or agency, you are acting as multiple people, a CMO, a CFO, and those decisions really do have to be made at that revenue and CFO level. And that's where looking at this targeting, but also really leaning into that measurement aspect that can help inform those decisions is so powerful.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And one thing that we often see is you've got folks like Raul and I on this call, and we're talking about, hey, here's what we would recommend, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're hearing. For us at Division D, and I Trade Desk does it too, if I'm not mistaken, we put our money where our mouth is when it comes to CTV. So we are running our own campaign that is reaching our own targeted audiences. We've iterated off of that for ourselves. And it's something that I think is really important to realize is that we take our best experiences that we are advising clients on, and also implementing those ourselves. And so we really, experienced firsthand in multiple ways how audiences are shifting and different nuanced ways to engage in reaching new people.
Yeah, I mean, when we go back and kind of tying this all back to, audiences, not just publishers are fragmented, but audiences are absolutely everywhere. So how can we go about finding them, coupling them, and ultimately making sure that you're staying in front of the right audiences? Because I mean, again, I would say I'm a very athletic person. I love different types of brands. I love wearing Adidas here and there, but I love my Nike. I've just always been a loyal Nike guy since I was 6 years old. But when I think about the types of folks that Nike would want, they want to roll Montoya because they know that he's the perfect guy. He's always going to buy a Nike. Whereas maybe a person who's probably going 50-50 to Adidas and Nike. So there's a way to find the right audience, but then narrow in on the top 10% of what that audience looks like because you know that they're always going to purchase from you, but they want more of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that's about kind of time spent calibrating expectations, not just media investment in general, but also just around CTV. What people want is to find those niche audiences, right? And a lot of times what we hear is, oh, I want to be in these premium channels that we mentioned earlier. And those are great places to start. But there are areas where audiences are actively engaging, where Raul is, maybe potentially just close enough to buying his new set of Nikes, but he's not on necessarily one of the most premium channels. He's not on HBO. He's watching elsewhere, right? He's shifted his viewing, and so programmatic and biddable CTV is a great way for you to also discover some of those audiences and discover where Rahul may or may not be, and really find then more of that top 10%. Perhaps it's that top 15% of people who are going to be loyal to your brand, loyal to your company, and everything of that sort.
Yeah, I think the other thing, it also depends on what ultimately what you're trying to get done for this particular campaign. So if we're talking like an awareness tactic with the World Cup, FIFA World Cup about to begin in about 4 days, the only way to get into is through DAZN, which is a streaming service that's going to be completely streaming. You're not going to be able to watch it through linear capability. But if you're trying to, spike awareness and get in front of folks that have never been in front of, that's a great opportunity. So it comes down to, are you trying to get product off the shelf, or are you trying to get folks that have never either heard of you start talking about you?
Yeah. And I mean, talking about you, of course, then goes back to how are you creating that community? Because you want people to be bringing you up in their local chats with their friends, their family, and everything like that. And so it is about reaching that audience. It is about understanding that fragmentation is here to stay, but that's where having partners like Division D and the Trade Desk to help brands navigate all of those different spaces with live sports appearing across multiple different streaming partners at this point. None of us are just now turning on TNT or TBS and being able to see all of those sports. They are across the board. So you need somebody who can help you and inform you on how that's shifting and get you into those spaces, right? And then also understanding that even though folks have probably been told, and historically it is true that CTV was a bit of a barrier to entry on budget, that is accessible. There are levers of actionability that we can pull on behalf to get you into these spaces that are going to perform and that will generate ROI and return that your CFO, your CMO, and everyone might be looking for. It really is looking at some of those metrics.
And just to add on top, I mean, we pride ourselves in having accessibility to every single live sporting event you can possibly think of. So whether it's the World Cup FIFA event, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Black Friday, the Bears are playing, by the way, plug in for Chicago Bears. But we will have that accessibility. You think about like even Apple TV for the first 2 rounds of the NFL playoffs last year. Between the calendar that we set up that we're constantly building on top for PMPs to give you access to, along with Division E, making sure that everyone's in a total alignment for anyone on this call, if there's a live sporting event that you want to be in front of, like reach out to us and we'll make sure to get you in front of it.
Yeah. And Raul, you raised such a really good point because for a lot of our current partners and even prospective partners that are looking to engage and get into the CTV space, it really is about, like we've said before, finding that right partner that can be agile and that can adapt and make decisions on the pace of change, whether that's macroeconomic conditions or a refocus of consumer behavior. We want to be open to new partnerships, new technology, everything like that. And so finding that right partner in the duality, the power duo, if I can, that's visible here is so important to brands and agencies.
Couldn't agree more.
So, like with any channel, and we've heard CTV is going to continue to iterate in ways that we can't predict, but leaning into that changing direction, moving as quickly or as carefully as momentum allows is one of those things that really will help those independent brands and agencies thrive. And that brings us to what I consider a really fun moment. This happens often on various webinars and things like that, where none of us have a crystal ball, but we do like to see and think about what's happening future forward. And so, Roel, I want to hear your take. I will certainly give my take, but we want to hear the audience's take here as well. We pre-populated again some bold predictions that have been written in the trades or we've heard as headlines at different conferences. And again, if it's not listed here, we would love to see other thrown in the chat. Hopefully, if we have time to answer it live, we absolutely will. And just for edification here, if we don't have time, we'll be sure to send some additional answers out after this one. So, Ro, I'll let you take it away. What are you predicting?
So it's the first one, the expansion of measurement. It has never been more important to make that advocacy for CTV. And I think about, again, what we spoke to a little bit earlier about path of conversion, and we talk about omnichannel being almost on top of that. It's showing what actually allowed for this conversion to occur. So all the touch points, but then on top of that, how do we build that cake correctly so that moving forward, we find those consumers? We're going to have to advocate for CTV more than ever because of the price points, but also did it help that person make that consumption or make that conversion down the funnel? The thing I really got through though is, oh, sorry, go on.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah, that is one that is, I think, really exciting to solve for in the future.
The second piece I'd say is live sports, and this was mostly related also at the upfronts in New York recently. But live sports down the funnel in the next 6 months, there's going to be so much appetite to get inside of it, especially when it comes down to CPMs and barrier to entries, and who's going to have the accessibility. We're talking again World Cup. This is by DAZN, and DAZN's the only publisher that's going to have that access. You can have that access through the trade desk, but there's other publishers that aren't going to have that, which makes it harder for them. So when you talk about consolidation and property, that's going to be soon important. We talk about the NFL and Black Friday game. Who's going to have accessibility to that? Live sports is going to become more and more important, but it's also only going to be available through streaming, a particular sporting event. So I'm excited to see where that goes, but it's already kind of occurring right now.
Yeah, I think live sports it has been huge in the past and it still will be. It'll be about navigating to find all of these shifting eyeballs and where live sports will be sitting as those different folks will be making contracts with all the different programmers and things like that. For me, I think the future looks more in the consolidation aspect. I find it so funny and comical that I got started in CTV and television in this business, specifically in CTV about 10 years ago. And in that time, it was just when we were talking about cord cutting, cord stacking. And that shift in linear has certainly happened and will continue. But I actually foresee the future where some of that then reconsolidates, hopefully not in the same way of true legacy cable television, but to see some of that kind of repackaged together. Right now, we're calling it curation in some aspects, but I do think you will see also some of those independent channels collapse. Right now, I think if you have one single program, you get to set up your own streaming channel at this point. So there's not a lot to be had sometimes there.
I definitely understand where you're coming from too. I see that a ton, especially when I'm kind of surfing across what I'm looking to watch. And sometimes there's terrible shows from 20 years ago that I just like to turn on and not think sometimes. I'm like, wait, how is this on this publisher? Oh, they're running this for 12 hours. I get it. They're looking for me.
Yeah. So we do have a few time for questions. I think we have about 10 minutes here. So I think what I will do, like we talked about, is I will go ahead, read these out, provide a little bit of response, and Raul, of course, you're here as our partner, and we want to make sure that we're tackling this together as a dynamic duo. So, see, this first one I see is how do I know if my brand is ready for CTV? Candidly, your audience is already there. Less candidly, it's going to be more about if you're looking for scale and efficiency into reaching that audience. And like we said, if you're coming from a performance mindset, there's a lot of opportunity to then integrate into CTV. But the bottom line, I think, is if you're running social, display, search, but especially linear, you're already ready for CTV and your audience is already engaging there. So it's about being flexible to give it enough time to try. It's not something that you could throw your whole budget into for 1 month and really see the results. Anything that you do in that capacity, even like exercising too much too hard, can actually be bad for you. Same thing for CTV and whether or not you're ready.
Yeah, and just to add on top of that, if your client's already doing and leveraging dollars versus linear, the way to approach the CTV aspect would be basically kind of being able to connect the web. And so if you're already running across social, there's parameters that we can in place here at the trade desk, so we can show you that connection of how did social connect, but also help with the conversion across CTV, or how did they interact with one another. The other aspect is CPMs. They're not what, again, we're talking about what they're not what they used to be. I think there's a story there to tell back to your client, but if they already have linear that's running, I think this is pretty much an easy turnaround.
Exactly. So let's keep going through. There's several more of these questions, and I want to try to get to as many of them as we can live. Second one is we're laser focused on sales, and what's the best way to actually track how CTV is moving the needle for us? Well, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think there's a few solutions here, but one of them would be the path of conversion. So if you're super heavy about sales, there's a ton of folks on the Division D side as well as Trade Desk that can help advise on this. But path of conversion is going to be able to show you, well, the multiple touch points in which, if you're trying to drive sales with like display, I guess the other question would be like, how have you done this before? But there's multiple channels and we can leverage out, but CTV is going to be a complement. If we're talking about the call to action there, CTV has to be throughout the entire journey. And so whether it's display or other channels you're looking to leverage to actually get that conversion, I would basically offer to test it out and show you. Then we can demonstrate how did CTV help you increase sales across the board, along with, I guess, more so added new customers. So new folks or acquired customers that you didn't necessarily get to convert before.
Finding audiences is half, if not more, the even more of that battle. I still think, to couple with that, if you're laser focused on sales, looking and really digging deep on what that creative storytelling is, how you're talking to that audience, and being open to, working with our creative studio team, our design studio team, and having them help support you in really driving that CTA to connect with that audience is really also what will help move that needle when we're talking about performance CTV.
Nicole, I did see a really great question, and just because we didn't talk too much about it, but I want to make it especially clear for everybody on the call. One of the
Yeah.
questions was, what is your approach for more niche audiences like B2B brands or finance brands who aren't trying to target a large audience or compete with larger brands like a Nike or national brands? So I'd say working with Trade Desk and Division D, like we're going to have a plethora of over 300 data partners that you can leverage within our UI. So some that come immediately in mind are like Bombora or Dun and Bradstreet. And so I've seen this a ton with B2B, but we also have proprietary solutions that we could build on top. So there's a ton that we can do. I would say let's reach out to your Division D rep, but that's a really great question. There's a ton that we can do there.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you caught that 'cause they keep coming in and as others come in, they're popping down. So thank you for jumping on that. There's another one here of how would you recommend getting a client who's never done CTV on board with it? I think some of that we've certainly talked about and helping them understand that this is not just a nascent space anymore. And I would actually empower you or encourage you to ask them about their own consumption habits. For the most part, almost everyone is streaming or in CTV at some point. And it is a delicate balance there in just how one individual consumes or watches streaming and CTV is not ubiquitous and how everybody else watches it. But having that conversation, just a dialogue and saying, hey, like, how do you watch your TV? Here's how I watch mine. And then shifting that into, let's talk about your audience, because I also bet that they're also watching in these different ways. Let's talk about how we want to connect with them.
Yeah, and to add on top of that, I'd say case studies is number one. Between the trade desk and the amount of Division D case studies that we have created together, depending on the vertical that you particularly are working in, we can send you quite a bit of them to make sure that your client feels comfortable, but it gives reassurance of things that have worked in the past. So we're not necessarily completely doing something brand new. It's just applying what we've done in the past to what you're currently trying to do for your client.
Exactly. And those case studies will iterate too, just as new entrants come into the space, new technology, new tools, new levers. And that's why, when you work with partners like Division D and the trade desk, it's our job to stay on top of all of that and then act on your best behalf, keep you informed on what's going on, and make those suggestions so your campaigns can be even more powerful and effective. There's another question here on any suggestions for small businesses and franchise systems. CTV might be a cost-effective way to test TV brand awareness success. Oh,
I love this question just because I've done it a ton in my past. Any suggestions for small businesses and franchise systems in a cost-effective way? So I guess the first question for me would probably be depending on what the geo looks like. But if it comes down to not necessarily where you're appearing, because the environment should come second, audiences should come first. But I'd say let's start out with a small test budget and let's apply a specific budget that your client's okay with. And we create a strategy in which we can show you, well, this is the ROI and this is what you're looking to get done. Um, I guess it just comes down to what the geo is going to look like, but I would say let's have a conversation about it. Let's reach out to your Division D team. The only thing that kind of comes back on me about this is that if it is a smaller geo, like that bidding structure is going to be that much harder because if there's 200 people in Harlingen, Texas, going after those 200 people is going to be harder than ever before. But lean on us to help make that strategy and make it as cost effective as possible.
yeah, CTV many years ago was honestly a more national opportunity, but now because it really has been built off of the digital pipes that exist, you also get the best benefits of digital, which allows you to do more geofenced, more localized, even zip level targeting. And you can use some of that data to inform even your own market expansions or reallocations or shift your budgets as well. But another thing, with that would be go to some of those more creative formats. Be willing to test and learn. Does the shoppable and interactive, dynamic, creative formats, work for you? Try one particular call to action, and if you're having a sale or something else, look at another. Repurposing those existing assets strategically, leaning into some of those creative assets and opportunities that are available to you through various design studios all help keep production costs low, your impact high, and really again drill down into that.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question, Nicole? I'm not sure where we stand on right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
I see this really great question. You mentioned the importance of finding where your top audience is. Do you have any tips on how to best find where your audience is before campaign launch to ensure dollars are being used efficiently? So as soon as I read that, I immediately thought about how like the trade-us operates. And whenever we have a new RFP that we're looking to create, give recommendations on, my first thought goes, well, what are like the top 5 data providers that we want to work with? And so we go to those top 5 data providers that align with what the product is that you're trying to sell. And then we go to those data providers and say, well, how recently did those folks engage? Did they purchase recently? What are these segments that you're listing out that actually align with this product? And we take 2 or 3 of the best segments of each provider, and then we apply those and we have a conversation about it. But I think data along with CTV, like we talk about, yeah, content or being obviously king and data being queen, like they come together. So how do we apply them? And that's kind of like the marriage of it all.
Yeah, and a beautiful marriage is, between Division D and you, right? Because for us, 80%, 85% of our entire staff is on the back end. So when we're looking at different verticals, subject matter experts, everything like that, we have the tools that the trade desk provides, with also then the expertise at a very microscopic level based on channel with in-house within Division D. And so that's where be unafraid to take the meeting with, a supply provider or a provider, and also be unafraid to ask that question to your media partner. Let us, work on that for you and help build that out and iterate with you. I think we might have time for just one more, Raul. Are you good with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. There's one last one here. What are the benefits of consolidating your CTV partner with other paid channels that you're running?
I love this question. It almost comes too much to mind for me. But the benefits of consolidating, I think of that almost as like the Bible for the trade desk, but also I think media in general. We could go back to like the omni-channel strategy. And ultimately, like it's not about necessarily putting $100,000 in one channel and saying, let it fly. If you can have an entire campaign that has multiple channels on it, we just want to be able to see which ones are working for your particular client, which ones are going to get you that conversion quicker than ever before. So we go back to the omni-channel strategy of creating that cake. These are the 3 ingredients that work best. And when it comes back down to consolidation, when you have buys and other platforms, you can't tell that holistic story. So when you have your buys, particularly 3 or 4 of them with just the trade desk and Division D, you can tell the holistic story of this is when this person first saw the ad, this is when the person saw the end of the ad, and it took 7 different touch points. And then there's particularly different strategies where it might have taken a person 4 different touch points. So how do we find more of those individuals? It's a never ending cycle of how can we get better at what we're doing, but consolidation is key. If there's anything I can preach and leave with this conversation is consolidation.
I would even frame it as curation, right? Which is what we're talking about in the industry in general. It's curating that media partner, and it's curating that CTV and coupling that with a partner who helps on your other paid channels. Because where we started this conversation, where the industry is talking here in 2025, is essentially fragmentation fatigue, and how we, move past that so that we as brands, we as marketers are being more strategic and more efficient, and allowing one partner to look at that holistically, especially when that partner is agile and agnostic and can get you into all these different spaces. When you have, companies that have entered and perhaps also made an exit, or when you have new entrants into the space, that agility and agnostic partnership really helps you then be at the forefront of those spaces rather than having to rely on yourself to figure all that out, adapt to a new dashboard, new platform. It's just tighter alignment for broader campaign goals. So this last question that I saw is, will there be a recording distributed after this? There will be a recording. There'll be a survey afterwards as well for us to follow up with you. If you do have further questions, you can reach out to myself or Raul, or anyone else that may or may not follow up with you from the Division D team as well. But we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Raul. I always appreciate your partnership and us being able to create this opportunity to engage with folks who are interested in getting into the CTV space, a little curious how, or just maybe afraid to start, but letting people know that there is a seat at the table and that this is an actionable place that can really drive powerful performance.
Absolutely. And the only other thing I would add on top is that if you're already working with Division D, like congrats. That's great decision on that. And if you haven't been working with Division D, please start now. It's an incredible partner with a lot of great folks. And again, I go back to the structure, basically in alignment with how we all work together. And I'm just very proud of how Division D operates, but also just the amount of talent and thought provoking, but also industry leaders that exist there. So that's my spiel I'll give on Division D.
Thank you. We appreciate that shout out so much. The same goes to you. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.
Bye, everybody.